Hello, and welcome to part two of my functional herbal therapy primer series. In this second video, we're going to be talking about the defining attributes of functional herbal therapy. And here they are listed here. Now, I'm going to go through them one by one. So there's actually no point in me listing them out now because we'll be covering each one. But I identified, based on my clinical experience and thinking things over, 7 key defining attributes of functional herbal therapy. So let's begin with number one. Which is understanding diseases as disordered processes of physiology. And it's built on the concept that a normal functioning human body is both free from disease and, more importantly, capable of resisting disease. So a deeper understanding of the cause and treatment of disease should largely come from a consideration of physiology, not pathophysiology. Now, in the mainstream model, chronic diseases are viewed as requiring management and not cure. And it's very rarely acknowledged that you can cure, for example, an autoimmune disease, and yet you can through a functional herbal therapy approach. Now, in contrast, the traditional medical systems, and here I'm talking about Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, and so on, which are partially or completely based on herbal medicine, concerned themselves more with the underlying physiological imbalances that led to and now sustain the disease. And of course, they may use a different language. You know, Chinese medicine talks about the elements and tastes and meridians and what have you, but it's still looking to take a physiological understanding to the approach of curing a disease. The second defining attribute is this concept of mosaic diseases. That complex diseases are mosaic in nature. So the concept was first proposed by Irving Page, you know, the famous, I think he was cardiologist, in 1950 in the context of hypertension. But it's been expanded substantially, and that happened in 1989 when Johannes Schoenfeld coined the term for autoimmune disease. So let's have a look at what Schoenfeld says. He says, for example, in this 1989 paper, the shorter Oxford English Dictionary defines mosaic disease as the process of producing pictures or patterns by cementing together small pieces of stone, glass, etc. This definition carries by implication that by reassembling the pieces in a different order, another pattern or picture will emerge. And it's our contention that much the same process is evident with autoimmune diseases. Thus, by rearranging much the same starting materials, in other words, the same sort of predisposing and causative factors that cause autoimmune disease, different patterns of disease develop. So there's this commonality of factors through autoimmune disease. There's many of them. They come together in a mosaic, but for each individual it's different, and you may end up with a different disease label. And he goes on to say that by 1980 it became clear that despite many differences based on their location, all the autoimmune diseases shared a great number of fundamental properties. Now, each piece in the mosaic is a causative factor in the disease, but it also means that each patient is a unique picture, and it also means that multiple factors or mosaic pieces or causative factors imply that multiple interventions are required. So, you know, if you just give one drug that targets one factor, you might get palliation of the disease, but you're not going to resolve it at that deeper level. You're not going to change its course per se. So let's look at the key principles of the mosaic disease concept. The first is that each patient is a unique picture, and that's due to the random combination of causative factors. The fancy word for random is stochastic, and it means the patient's story is paramount. It also means that we need to dive deeper into an understanding of causation. So I've defined causation by the 3 P's: predisposing, like genetics; precipitating, like a pathogen, and here that's definitely the case, I think, in many autoimmune diseases; and perpetuating, for example, a maladaptive stress response or a sensitization of the immune system to self-tissues. So the question is, which one of these causes do you prioritize in a particular patient? And the answer is you don't prioritize any. You need to treat all 3. You need to target all 3 as you can isolate and identify them based on the person's history and what is known about the disease. So that's going to give you a lot of targets. So I then suggest that what we do is we apply what I call the OST rule. And that's an acronym based on 3 key concepts. So the first is overlap therapeutic activity and use complex treatments. So the beauty of herbs is that they're multitasking. And you look at ginkgo biloba, for example, it supports microcirculation, it supports mitochondria, it supports cognition, it's seriously good anti-inflammatory, and so on. So you've got all of those properties already built in by just using the one herb. So that's overlapping therapeutic activity. And then the S stands for sequencing treatments. So you don't necessarily need to hit all the targets that you've identified at the same time at the first consultation, for example. And as part of that, you need to triage, set priorities. And some of that comes with clinical experience, but there is an element of trial and error as to what the priorities are, where you should begin, for example, and then follow up later. The third defining principle of functional herbal therapy is matching energetics. And this is a more traditional consideration, because fundamental to all traditional herbal systems was the energetic concept of heat. And indeed, heat was life. So both diseases and herbal remedies were viewed through this filter. And for example, if someone has a cold condition, you don't give them cold herbs. And if someone has a hot condition, you don't give them hot herbs. And as mentioned, heat in these traditional herbal systems was equated to vitality and life. In every tradition, you also find the frequent use of heating remedies, the hot spices or pungent remedies, chilies, ginger, black pepper, and so on. So it's not an overriding principle, but we do need to take energetics into account when we're selecting herbs. So there's some examples of this is how you manage fever. So with fever, you need to maintain it almost as a slow burn. And interestingly, I've seen some credible modern medical papers now talking about this kind of idea, rather than just put a blanket on it and turning it off. So you do that by applying remedies that are cooling but not overly cooling, or remedies that bring heat to the surface like diaphoretics. And another example is bitter herbs. Bitter herbs are cold, so bitter herbs, for example, stimulate GLP-1, so you might want to give them long-term in weight loss. And if the person is hot constitutionally, that's great. But if the person is cold, then you need to combine the bitter herbs with warming digestive herbs like mandarin peel, chen pea, and ginger, for example. Number 4 is complex interventions for complex disorders. Now, the basic considerations that support this concept of complex interventions, and when you're dealing with herbs, you have 2 layers of complexity. You have the complexity of just the individual herb extract itself, because it is indeed a phytochemical soup with many, many different phytochemicals in it. But then you have the next added layer of complexity, because you're probably going to be giving more than one herb. And then you have the additional functional herbal therapy layer of complexity. You're going to define a range of targets that need to be hit or addressed, and for that you're going to give several herbs in each case. So you definitely need the OST rule to make sure that the patient doesn't come out with a huge bag of products at the end. But what supports this is that the fact that you have multiple factors or pieces in the mosaic, you need multiple interventions. And you determine, as I said, the interventions for each patient via their case history and what's known about their disease and so on. And I mentioned already that if you use a drug, for example, to target one point in a pathophysiological network and completely shutting down, it both doesn't resolve the disease and it risks side effects. So in order to understand how a chemically complex intervention might be valuable, we need to invoke a very modern and recent concept, and that is the concept of network pharmacology. And it really does underpin functional herbal therapy in my view. So I'll explain what I'm talking about here. So here's a biochemical sequence of events that occur in the body of various factors. So there's a factor P that stimulates the release of factor Q, that stimulates factor R, and then S, and then T. And someone with the disease has too much T. So generally what's done in drug development, they say, oh, there's too much T, we'll develop drug X and stop the production of T. Problem solved. But then what happens is you can end up with too much S, and that causes problems, or T goes too low and that causes problems, and so you get side effects or failed treatments and what have you. So some other drug designers might say, let's work up the chain and we'll instead target P to Q. But that also can cause problems, because you might end up with a deficiency of R, S, and T as a result. So what happens with network pharmacology is you ideally target every step in that chain, but every step in that chain by just a small amount. It's sufficient to bring T back into normal physiological balance without upsetting the needed amounts of P, Q, R, and S. So it looks like that. And A, B, C, and D might all come from your herbal mixture, one herbal extract with all its different phytochemicals, or from your combination of all the herbs together. So this is very simplistic, but I hope it's been able to illustrate the point for you, what it looks like in practice. And the Chinese have done many, many papers in this regard, and they're worth reading. It looks like this. So you can see that this is network pharmacology in its complexity. And up the top, you've got 4 different herbs, which are in a combination that's used to help stimulate cell production from bone marrow. And you see they've picked out from each herb a range of phytochemical constituents and the targets that they hit and the effects they have. It says diseases bottom left, but it's not really. It's the actual physiological effects that they have, like regulating bone marrow stroma cells, regulating hemopoietic growth factor, and regulating hematopoietic stem cell apoptosis. So it's very beautiful. You can read, that's a very basic introduction to network pharmacology and its complexity. And if you're interested, you can source that paper. It's open access, and have a read. So number 5 is applying 12 core strategies for treatment. And those 12 core strategies are going to vary both with the individual patient and the disease processes that are going on. So again, I'm going to go through these, most of them in detail, in slides 3 and 4, in videos 3 and 4. But here they are, and you all see they're all about doing things more, optimizing, eliminating, improving, supporting, only occasionally lowering, but you will see even the next word after that, or the next concept after that, is boost. So it's all about, as I said, this concept of physiological enhancement, with the only one not really being in that category, number 10, eliminate chronic inflammation. But if you drill down and you look at the steps behind eliminating chronic inflammation, a lot of that comes back to physiological enhancement. Yes, you will use anti-inflammatory herbs as well, because often inflammation can't resolve itself and it needs assistance, or sometimes patients just need symptomatic treatment, so to buy time. So that's number 5, the 12. So number 6 is modular treatments and pulse dosing. So first, talking about modular treatments, it was my early experience with the bowel flora protocol that revealed the value of using treatment modules. And for many chronic diseases, you can't address every treatment objective at once. It's not practical in terms of both compliance and cost and so on. So the way to meet this challenge is to sequence treatments as packaged modules. And these are modules that you don't necessarily need to do forever. You can do it for a month or 2 months or 3 months and see what the outcomes. And they normally have a distinct endpoint in mind. So you're doing the bowel flora protocol or bowel flora balance protocol, for example, to change bowel flora to a healthier state. And once you achieve that, as long as the diet's good and other factors are addressed, you don't necessarily need to keep doing that protocol. So here are the examples that I've come up with of modular treatments that are quite suitable in this context. Bowel flora protocol, as mentioned, detoxification, a module for addressing the impact of stealth pathogen with variations depending on the pathogen type that you're targeting, and one for lowering immunological danger that hence can address immune-driven inflammation, as in autoimmune diseases. So here's an example, the bowel flora balance protocol with a focus on gut barrier health. It's 7 days a week. You might want to give upper digestive support with bitters and warming digestive herbs. But essentially, it's about weeding and feeding. Now, if you look bottom left, you can weed for 3 days, even 4 days. It just depends on how much adjustment to the flora you need. So in the weeding phase, you apply a range of antimicrobial herbs. Options are listed there. The advantage of these herbs is they're very broad based, so they don't just target bacteria, they're fungi and protozoa and so on. And then in the feed, seed and gut wall healing phase, you're giving herbs to improve gut wall healing, and you're giving herbs that act as prebiotics. You can even use pomegranate as well, but I use the green tea, rosemary, grapeseed, turmeric combination, mainly for the grapeseed and green tea, because they're excellent prebiotics that seem to promote the growth of healthy gut flora and inhibit the growth of pathobionts. Pomegranate seems to do that as well. Now you're going to do that in addition with a prebiotic, fiber, and even a probiotic. So that's one example, the bowel flora balance protocol. Here's the stealth bioburden reduction protocol, and this is a fairly broad-based one. So on days 1 to 4, you're going to give myrrh and Artemisia annua as a source of artemisinin. They're the main things to do. Days 1 to 4. You're only doing it for 4 days because both those herbs you shouldn't take long-term continuously because of various side effect issues and loss of efficacy issues. And the myrrh and the artemisinin from Artemisia annua are focused on a range of pathogens, but particularly things like helminths and protozoa, those sort of things. But Artemisia annua does also have antiviral activity, good antiviral activity, and myrrh stimulates the immune system against a whole range of pathogens. And then days 5 to 14, you're taking more an antiviral approach using echinacea for immune support and 3 key herbs that I think are clinically relevant with antiviral properties: St. John's wort, thuya, and licorice. Bioavailable curcumin is another one you can even add in that days 5 to 14 for antiviral properties. For best results, 6 cycles recommended, so that's 84 days. That's nearly 3 months, but that can give you the best results. And the beauty of this is it's testing by treating. So you don't know if stealth pathogens are necessary at play in a particular individual with a chronic disease. Try it out. Do this for 84 days and see what happens. Because you can't test for these pathogens because they're either hidden away in tissues where you can't access them, or the thing about testing for a pathogen, you've got to know what to look for. So what are you looking for? You don't necessarily know. So this is the beauty of herbs. Because they're so low in toxicity relative to their activity, you can use them in a test by treating concept. And finally, number 7 is support the affected tissue. So there are a range of herbs which, based on clinical evidence, generally, I don't think there's anything there that's traditional per se. Maybe with kidneys it's more traditional, and you see it's more complex because we don't have the one kidney protecting restorative herb. All of these others, they basically come from clinical trials. Exception is mucous membranes, golden seal, that's mucous membranes lining the lungs or the digestive tract, that's traditional. But the rest is evidence, modern evidence based, and it has 2 aspects, as I've already said, is one, you're protecting the tissue, but you're also restoring the tissue. So what do you do if the particular tissue you want to support isn't on that list? Because that list essentially is comprehensive of what we know to date that's credible. You may come up with others, but I believe these are the credible ones. Well, we can apply a general strategy. Microvascular support, that's one of the protocols in functional herbal therapy you can use. Mitochondrial support, another protocol in functional herbal therapy. And the NRF2 herbs, again, another protocol in functional herbal therapy that enhances detoxification, protection, repair, and indeed mitochondrial function. And that way you're supporting any tissue and don't necessarily need a herb that's targeted for that particular tissue. So thank you. This concludes part 2. I look forward to joining you in part 3, where we outline the 12 specific strategies.